Good morning, Sean here, Mountains Garage. It's a pleasant Friday morning, early, and I was just doing some calculation on how many hours I spent in the shop this week working on Turbo 400s. 2 of them. That's all I got to show for the week. And I average 7 hours a day in the shop, plus I snuck in a couple evenings. I spent 17 hours apiece on these transmissions. Again, and I'm not sitting on my hands or playing on my phone. I'm working steady. These 2 builds were a little bit slow because a lot of the transmissions I build, I'm buying a valve body, so in the time it takes to open a box and unpackage it and read the instructions, that part of the job is done. In this case, the black transmission is a TH400, and the guy that owns it wanted it to shift automatically, but still wanted all the good stuff, wants a transmission that'll take some power. So I'm going to show you how to build an automatic shifting valve body. It's been a long time since the transmission left here with a modulator sticking out of the side of it. And the red one is a 400 forward pattern manual shift, also easily doable by yourself. That's what we're going to cover in this video. So I had to modify that valve body as well. I still haven't picked up my tools. Everything's devastated here in the shop as usual, apparently. I'm a little disappointed at the amount of time it took me, but I'm not surprised. It just takes time. I try to, individually paint everything and all the cleaning of the parts. It's a lot. And this is pretty much what I do every week, but hey, it beats working. A lot of people have asked how to get the brake drum off a TH400, so I'll quickly show you that. It's not hard. And we'll go over how to modify a couple of valve bodies. Starting with the TH400, which in my opinion is pretty now. It certainly was not when it got here. In fact, when I first saw pictures of it, I suspected it had water in it, and unfortunately, I was correct. I was able to save everything, but there was rust in the pump, some of the valve body, a few miscellaneous pieces that are in the pan. So that just adds to the hours trying to save rusty stuff. But it was a nice low mileage motorhome TH400, 1987, last year of the normal valve body configuration, 6 check balls. Most TH400s only have 2 studs here, which this one did for the emergency brake cable bracket. So I removed the one typical bolt-on yoke bolt in the center. This has a giant parking brake, but it's the same as a bolt-on yoke, so just buzz the 3/4 headed bolt out of there. And I just take the 6 bolts off the tail housing, and that's the bracket that the 2 nuts that were over the studs were on the tail housing. And I beat the whole thing off together. It's all intact. It's kind of rusted together anyway, so I find this the most efficient method. You have to use a wrench on the bolts. In this case, the transmission was really dry, so I had to work them back and forth and spray them and tap on them so I didn't pull the threads out of the case. So you're going to waste some time getting the brake drum off, but most motorhomes are in good shape and they'll come right off. This one I stuck a new tail housing on, and I machined for the slip yoke in the back. I've shown you that in a few videos. I had to do both transmissions in the lathe, so that adds to the amount of time it took me to do it. I'm not apologizing for the amount of time. I'm just trying to explain why it took me 17 hours apiece. And in this case, I was doing these side by side, so if I did a job to one transmission, I would do it to the other while the tools were out, trying to be efficient. But if I was working for somebody, I'd probably have to explain why it took me so long. I don't know. I don't work for anybody at the moment, so don't have to worry about it. Just now, while shooting the video, the owner of the black transmission asked if I could add a dipstick, a locking dipstick. So the beauty of this nice fixture, you can just flip it down out of the way and all the debris falls on the floor because I'm tapping that hole. This is a helicoil tap for an M10 1.5. So it's going on an LS engine, so then all the other bolts are metric, so this will work out nicely. Let's finish this little job. This is the part number for the dipstick I just used. All installed. It makes good use of the unused bell housing bolt in an LS application. and it's M10 1.5, so the socket size 15mm is all the same. A common theme in some of the modifications we're going to do today, I don't run the tap all the way through the hole. I left an aluminum shoulder to stop the thread insert so it can't escape if it wanted to. Not that it ever would. The bolt is an LS truck motor mount bolt that threads into the block. I have about a zillion of them. It's the correct length, doesn't stick out. That job is done. That way you just got to put in the other 5 bolts and they'll all be the same head. I was doing these 3/8 16, but makes more sense to do M10 1.5. In either case, the hole's the right size. I just ran the tap through, put the insert in, bolted it together. You can see I also, in both transmissions, drilled and tapped the vent, put in a 90-degree 1/8 pipe to 1/4 inch DOT truck airline push connect, so they can do whatever they want with the vent in the future. This is the forward pattern full manual Turbo 400, 1988, so it has the extra check ball case. I modified the existing valve body so that extra check ball is not an issue anymore. I'll show you what check balls I leave in both cases. I used my last modulator plug. I got to make some more or acquire some more. And my rule is always to put the governor cover on backwards. If there's no governor, which is the case here, there's no governor in there, but I painted the wrong side of the cover. So I broke my own rules and went ahead and bolted it on. Doesn't matter, no, I just like it backwards if there's no governor in there. But in this case, I'll leave it a mystery. Same vent fitting. This guy wanted red. That's what he got. Nice transmission. I'm trading for a bunch of stuff for this one. So once again, I'm using Turbo 400s like money. It's later in the day on Friday. I got the 2 kids down onto the dollies to roll them out the door in the morning when the owners come to get them. And rolled up another victim I'm going to strip tonight. It's always interesting to take apart name brand transmissions to see what's in there. I also have a TH400 to do this weekend, early in the week. So let's get to the valve body modifications. First, you need a couple of $100 shift kits. Or you can go to your local Harbor Freight or whatever, pay $5 for an assortment of set screws. Really handy for building stuff. And in this case, for blocking holes. You'll see. And you need a couple drill bits. This is all you're going to need. And a little bit of time to make either a firm shift and automatic valve body or a forward pattern manual valve body. This silhouette on the wall with the moose on it is the state of Maine. My buddy made it on his plasma table. If you don't see the resemblance from a Turbo 400 separator plate to the state of Maine, well, I can't help you. So we have some inexpensive hardware, some cheap drill bits, a separator plate, a valve body, and a few simple tools. We'll start with the separator plate. We got to drill a couple holes. This hole right here, and all this information is available online. None of this is my idea. I just take it and make it my own. This hole I drilled to 150 thousandths. I dual fed the direct. I want plenty of flow. I want a nice firm shift. You can play with the hole sizes. Get crazy if you want, but I believe there's diminishing returns. So I drill that one 150 thousandths, 154 I think is the actual drill size. Second gear, I take this little hole, I open it up to 1/8 inch. And because we dual fed, which means we left the center seal off the direct drum inside, we left the second seal back from the front on the center support, and we need to either weld this hole shut and grind it. I don't do this step. What I do is, after I have assembled the transmission, at least as far as the center support, I drive a 3/8 cut plug or freeze plug in this right hand hole, right hand from this perspective, looking at the transmission. That's your center support bolt. Plug this hole right here. That's the 3 steps for dual feeding the directs on a Turbo 400. So other than cleaning and deburring, We're done with the separator plate. Be aware that the lower valve body gasket, the one that actually says valve body, is all the same in every kit, on every transmission. The upper gasket that goes against the case, there's two versions, 1987 and older, and 1988 and up. So be aware, they both come in the kit. Choose the right one for your application. This is a 6 check ball case. The 7th check ball would be right there if it was that style case. It's not. The only check balls I use, and it's easy to remember, center in the front, or front and center, and one in the bathtub. So I use 2 check balls. Center front, one in the bathtub. The next step I do, which is optional, is to remove the 2-3 accumulator spring, and I'm going to block the feed hole right there. That directly taps 5/16 18 without drilling any holes. I run the tap in. Like I mentioned, I don't go all the way through. I leave a shelf to contain a set screw. I just make sure it's below the surface of the valve body, and I plug that hole. I remove the spring using the pair of vice grips like that. Gently work it down, that until you can get the C-clip out, or E-clip, depending on what you want to call it. Don't put a plastic piston back in. Buy one with the 3 tiers like that. If this is like yours, they also make a smooth one in way back in the early 60s, but this is what you're probably going to encounter. Get the aluminum version, swap the seal over from your old one to the new one, and don't put the spring back in. So it's kind of a bear. You got to keep squeezing these tighter and tighter to get it all the way down to get that out. But to put it back in, just set the piston back down with the seal and put the E-clip back on. And we're done. Now we've removed the 2-3 accumulator. It's going to provide a much firmer 2-3 shift. If you drop the pan on a Turbo 400, look at the valve body, and this hole is still open like this one. This transmission still contains the built-in safety feature, which shifts the transmission from first to second at about 4,500 to 5,000 RPM, regardless of where you hold the shifter. You can have it in manual low, it's still going to upshift. We need to disable that. I've read all kinds of warnings about you could blow your engine if you disable it. Well, guess what? Every other vehicle on the planet without a Turbo 400 will stay in first gear, and you can blow the engine at wide open throttle if you want to. So we're not going to worry about that. But we need to plug that hole. All you got to do to remove the shift valve, we're going to pull this pin out. There's not a lot of spring pressure, if any. We're going to run a 1/4 inch coarse thread tap into this hole. Again, no drilling required. I go just a little ways in to leave the shelf like I mentioned, and I just put another set screw in there. I've seen people try to drive BBs or check balls in there. I don't trust they're not going to fall all the way through, so I like a threaded connection. It only took a second to pop the roll pin out, to pull this out. See the happy face? You're going to see that right down through these holes. It only goes back in one way, the way the end is cut anyway, so you couldn't put it in upside down. So with this out, it allows us to plug the hole and clean out the debris. And we also need to take this valve, put it on the bench grinder, and just grind. I grind down to that landing, 2 flats. So I'm going to grind a flat across here and across here, and just deburr it. I hold it on the bench grinder, just grind it flat, deburr it so it fits in the hole, and then just shove everything back in with Mr. Happy Face staring at you from this perspective. And those flats were just on this part of the valve, the small area, not the 2 big ones. So that would complete the mods for an automatic shifting transmission. The transmission's still going to have a governor under the cover and a modulator, and I screw there's an adjustment screw in that hole. I screw that in a few turns to make the 1-2 light throttle shift a little bit firmer and higher in mile per hour. There's weights you can play with on the governor, but I just manual shifted. If the actual high RPM automatic shift was important, I would probably be manual shifting or live with it. You can drive yourself crazy pulling the governor out, changing weights, trying to change what mile per hour it actually shifts, or RPM it shifts out of, first to second or second to third. So we've given it full manual capability. If you're looking for the ultimate automatic upshifts, that dream is achievable, but you have to keep pulling the governor out and playing with the weights. Now let's go full manual. We're going to do all the modifications we've done up to this point, plus a couple more. These are the governor tubes that send oil to the back of the case, through the governor, and back to the valve body. We're not going to run these anymore. We're going to take a 3/8 coarse tap, and again, no drilling. We're going to run the tap into these holes enough so we can put another set screw in there in each hole. That blocks the fluid from going out and back to the governor, but we have to do something with the pressure. Looking at the valve body from this perspective, your governor tube holes are right there, and there's a passage that runs this way, and you want to count up from this strange looking hole, not to the short one, but this one. You can see the round bump right here. We need to drill a 7/64 hole down into that passage. It's as simple as that, and that way the governor oil has a place to go. So 7/64 hole drilled right down through here. Again, this is full manual operation when we're not putting the governor tubes back in, and we plugged the end of the valve body. Up in the front pump, this is everything except the pressure regulator valve. I don't have one to show you, but this is everything outboard of that. For both automatic shifting and manual shifting, a lot of transmissions that I strip, they have a horseshoe shim that goes under the spring seat. So I go ahead and add one of those, and the springs come in different colors. This is out of a TH400. I got to figure, you can actually look up what the spring rating is, or you can come up with a way to measure it. It's a pretty firm spring. It's not like the aftermarket ones, but with the addition of the horseshoe, we're going to raise the pressure a little bit beyond stock. If you want to put a gauge in the transmission and play with the horseshoes, you could figure that out. So I do that for both automatic and manual while I'm rebuilding the transmission. If I'm not putting the spring that came with a valve body that I bought, but that's why I have all these extra springs, because of taking them out. The boost valve, full manual only, we need to grind a flat on this land right here, the big one, not the small one. So put it on the bench grinder, just grind a flat on this, deburr it, and that's ready to assemble. When you grind a flat on the boost valve on the pressure regulator, you need to plug this hole. I find it easier to plug this side. I tap that hole 5/16 coarse, and I put a set screw in it. I go in far enough so I'm beyond flush, just barely, so it doesn't interfere with the pump gasket. That hole either needs to be plugged here. Again, some people recommend a check ball. I don't trust it. That won't fall out, so I like a threaded connection. But this hole either here or here has to be plugged when you grind the flat on the boost valve. For the full manual, we had to grind the flat on the boost valve on the pressure regulator because we're putting the modulator valve back in with an aluminum plug instead of a modulator, effectively giving it full line pressure all the time. And in reverse, without that boost valve modification, they claim the pressure spikes to dangerous levels. So that simple cure, by grinding the flat and plugging that hole, allows you to put the solid aluminum plug, and you got to put your stock modulator valve in first, bolt the plug in with the O-ring, and that's done. Automatic shifting, I go ahead and put in the kick down solenoid and run the wire over to the connector, and that will still work. Full manual, I cut the wire off it and I bolt it back on just to plug the leak. If you get lost on how to assemble the valve body, the book is very handy and detailed. It'll get you there. If you're just doing the automatic modification or to get rid of the automatic shifting feature, and you're just taking out the 1-2 shift valve to plug the hole in the valve body, and your valve body's nice and clean, it's up to you whether you want to strip the entire valve body or not. When I'm drilling to plug the governor lines I'm going to get a lot of debris in the valve body. I just take them all out and clean it and put it all back together. That way you know it's nice and clean. It only takes a few minutes. The roll pins pop right out with a screwdriver. All the springs only have finger pressure on them. You can hold them in and put the roll pin in and out. The only one that has any somewhat scary pressure was the accumulator, 2-3 accumulator, and we used vice grips for that. And we didn't put it back in. All right, it really was that easy. Some cheap hardware and a couple drill bits, and you can make your transmission really talk to you. The stock shifts on a 400, they're not mushy unless it's a Cadillac, but they're going to be super firm now. And the full manual is also awesome. Manual valve bodies, if you're going to buy them, start at a couple $100. In the two transmissions that you see in the beginning of the video, the red one and the black one, in the direct drum, I split a set of trans brake return springs between the two. 8 heavy springs, 8 light springs in each of them to help fight centrifugal apply, which is plagued in the direct drum. That spins a lot of RPM. Trapped oil will tend to apply the clutches and start to burn them because they shouldn't be touching each other at that point. So that's why it's going to be a whole other video eventually, but you know, check balls in the pistons and bleed hole in the drum, all that stuff is to fight centrifugal apply. So to combat that, and the transmissions are going out, the customer doesn't know any different, and neither one's probably going to be super high RPM, but when I'm building it, I like to cover all the bases. It's really not that much money. Gives me peace of mind. Try to give the customer a good product. So like, share, subscribe. Don't be afraid to dive in, do stuff. It's hot rodding. Catch you later, bye.